You're listening to Kizuki, the podcast. I'm Mae Yoshikawa, and I define the Japanese concept of Kizuki as the following. Kizuki. 1. A moment of epiphany, an aha of realization or insight which opens the knower to a new dimension of truth that was formerly unknown. 2. Steps in an incremental growth of awareness, resulting in a movement from ignorance to greater awareness of the bigger picture. A kind of knowing that cannot be undone, that cannot be unrealized. As a longtime yoga and meditation practitioner, a world traveler, and curious self-explorer, I'm obsessed with Kizukis. Listen on each week for inspiring and enlightening stories that may just tip you over for your next aha. On this week's episode, In or Out? Hi everyone. So this week's episode has a little bit of a cultural flavor to it. I was having a conversation with my sister the other day, and we got to talking about how she feels a little uncomfortable about the way that in Japanese culture, when people refer to each other's coworkers, particularly in relation to speaking to people from another company, they use what's called yobiste. They call their coworker's name, last name only, without the formal suffixes such as san for politeness. So if you were polite with me, you would refer to me as Mei-san. If you were to use the familiar diminutive, you would say Mei-chan, which never happens in the workplace. However, in many Japanese schools, in most Japanese schools, and in the workplace as an extension of school, we don't call each other by our first names. People call each other by their last names, like Yoshikawa-san. Yet, if my staff and coworkers were to speak about me to someone from another company, they would call me Yoshikawa, like the quote-unquote rude way without the san. And that's because they consider me like a part of their family, their team, our company. So it would be impolite. It would be not right of them to refer to me as san because I'm someone on the inside. That got us into a whole conversation about, well, what's this whole boundary thing going on about who's in and who's out? So in this case, in the Japanese language and culture, if someone's on the outside, there is a layer, an invisible layer of politeness that just goes by rule of thumb. Yoshikawa-san, whatever-san, Sumisu-san, like Mr. Smith. In the United States or in English-speaking countries, it's like, you refer to each other by your first name. And if you were to be extra polite, like with your teachers or with first-timers, you might say Mr. Smith or Ms. Smith or whatever. But that doesn't usually get used for too long, especially as you get to know each other. And I feel like the rules around that are much softer than it is here in Japan. So my sister's telling me about how it feels awkward for her to refer to her coworkers by their last name and not use the suffix san. And I was like, that's interesting. It's like unnatural to me because I grew up going to international school and I wasn't really a part of the Japanese educational system. But I'm comfortable with my coworkers using it with me. I certainly don't take offense because that's just a cultural norm. And lately, I'm able to use it with my coworkers as well. Now, in my case, there is a sense of me going out of my comfort zone to use it because I'm not used to it. But I am also aware that the people who hear me refer to my coworker by his last name only without the suffix "sang" is not weirded out by it because that's just the norm here. And my sister's all like, really? You're comfortable with that? But what do you think about this whole idea of in and out? In parallel to that, in Japanese culture, there's the whole concept of honne and tatemae, which translates as truth or front. So not that the other front, the other face, is untrue or false, but maybe a little bit, right? It's kind of like wearing different masks. So you might have a work face, you might have a meet the in-laws face, you might have a hanging out with my girlfriend's face, hanging out with my new boyfriend face. And it's not like there's any malicious intent for the most part behind putting on these masks or wearing a front. It's just kind of different aspects of you. But you know, at the end of the day, when you go home and take that bra off or get in your PJs and you get in your comfort zone and let go of the mask, the front, the societal front. If you feel exhausted from your day, chances are there's a little bit of, it's like laced with inauthenticity or something. You're not wholly being yourself. That's the beautiful thing about being authentic, right? It comes with an effortlessness, so it shouldn't exhaust you. It's not easy, but you're not going to wind up at the end of your day feeling like, oh, that was such a drag. What a heavy day. Now, the tricky thing about these tatemae, the fronts, or the face that you put on to the out group, is that some of them can be cultural, and I don't just mean cultural by nations and cultures. It can be like corporate culture or family culture or different regions within the same country. There's various facets of culture, but a slight front of not being completely yourself, right? So we got to talking about this, and she was telling me about a friend who, when she got married, she got married to a man whose family originally was from like the southwestern region of Japan, not very urban area. So they're a little bit, maybe a lot more traditionalist in that area. And so the mom of the groom, so slightly older generation, has never taken her makeup off in front of her husband. So every morning she wakes up long before her husband gets up to put on her makeup and to put the curlers in her hair so that she's presentable before he wakes up. And then she gets busy cooking his breakfast and preparing for the day and running the house. And when I heard that, I was like, whoa, how exhausting, right? But they're also from a different generation. So I feel like a different generation and different region. So clearly there's a different culture around that. Clearly that was their norm. Then I got to thinking about, what kind of fronts have we normalized for ourselves? And here's what occurred to me. I must confess. And I told my sister this too. Don't judge. But in all of my relationships, me personally, since, I don't know, high school, I never got in a habit of farting in front of my boyfriend or even husband. What do you think about that? I wonder if maybe half of you listeners are like, oh, of course, I don't fart in front of him. or I don't fart in front of her. And then maybe the other half of you are like, what are you holding it in? That's so unhealthy. How long were you married to him for? You know? I remember reading this book by, I believe it was Alex L., and it's called After the Rain. And she's talking about how she met her husband after a couple of like difficult relationships. And when they finally got together and they knew that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together and they started living together, there's this really intimate scene that she writes about in this collection of essays where she says she was hanging out with her, I think then fiance, and they had started to live together and they were just cuddling and reading or something in their big bed. And she let out a fart. And it was a total embarrassing moment for her because it was the first time that she farted in his presence. And it was a laughable moment. I think maybe they even giggled. But apparently her partner then said, well, I'm glad we got that done. As in, that was bound to happen one day or another. So I'm glad you're not holding it in anymore. Now we can be normal and natural with each other, I think was how it was interpreted. Which is lovely, right? I mean, come on. How many of us have held it in to an unnatural degree, whether it's a fart or needing to pee or something, but you don't want to break the mood and you go on putting on a little bit of a front and you're not completely on the inside with him or her or your friend or whoever it is. Now, I'm not totally advocating here for girls, come on, let it rip, okay? Although that would be funny too. But I think my point is, my Kizuki moment was that these fronts we wear with little malicious intent, maybe even little awareness, at least to begin with, because it's been so normalized to put on that front in a men-women dynamic, or maybe it's with the in-laws, or maybe it's at work, whatever the dynamic is, there is a sense of being on the inside and putting somebody else on the outside, and therefore putting on that layer of politeness or properness. And so there's a bunch of unspoken, unaddressed things being held in there. Then my sister started telling me about, she's a huge fan of Glennon Doyle and Amanda and Abby Wambach on We Can Do Hard Things podcast. So my sister goes, well, Glennon asks Abby not to fart in front of her. And I was like, well, that's what I mean. At least there's a conversation about it. It's not like one person's holding it in and expected to hold it in like they're not human. There's a conversation about our wishes and hopes and expectations, but there's also an openness about the humanness of what's natural. So what do you guys think? And more importantly, are you someone who had been, maybe even now, holding it in and pretending like you're some pretty princess from the Disney world? Yeah. I also got to thinking about, I have a friend whose partner is deaf. And I was like, I wonder what she does. I guess she can just let it rip. But then maybe her partner is like more sensitive to the sense of smell, because sometimes when they're not as acute in one sense of smell, they're like super acute in others. Yeah. Anyway, guys, I think my point is just talk about it so that we can be real and true with each other and not have to put on this awkward, not human front. Know who your in people are and let them in. Thank you for listening. Learn more about me in my upcoming book, Kizuki, Realizations Beyond Time and Death, at my website, maey.live, or find me on Instagram at maeyoshiKawa.